When we look at Sri Lanka's economy, we have to compare with last year, June, July. From last year, June, July to now, I think we made significant progress. Also, you have to compare with some of the other markets that has gone through or going through a debt restructuring, like Zambia or Ghana. Zambia, of course, had a win last week. In the last couple of days, they actually got a deal on the debt restructuring, but they took time. Ghana also first did the DDR, and it took some time for them to get the formula and all the participation. So from that perspective, from Sri Lanka, from last year, from the debt suspension, then going to IMF in September, then getting the EFF, the staff level agreement and the board approval by March, and now we are discussing the DDO. Prices have come down. Very clearly we see the inflation settling to a single digit in Q2. The reserves have gone up to $3.5 billion. The external sector is performing reasonably well because the worker remittances have gone up to a 580 level. The tourism is also continuing with 60,000-70,000 tourists even in the off season. Now we are in the off season. Numbers have come down, but still it's promising. So tourism revenue is also about between 140 to 170. So our BOP gap is something like 400 to 500 million. We are in a comfortable position on the external sector. On the domestic side, of course, we are still trying to improve our revenue, so there are challenges. But comparatively, I would say Sri Lanka is in a much better position considering where we are after debt suspension. But in terms of key challenges, the biggest challenge is crossing the debt restructuring. Now we know there's a DDO been announced. And there'll be an external debt restructuring as well post that. So you have to work with the bilats, multilats, as well as, of course, the ISB holders. So getting all that aligned to a proper formula and getting everybody's buy-in and getting a debt relief of $17 billion from the debt pile of slightly over $80 billion will be crucial for Sri Lanka, because there are multiple parties to negotiate. So it's not an easy process. Second thing I would say again on the SOE reforms, because we did very well in the last couple of months, getting into cost reflective pricing, which we have never done. So now at least people are paying the price of a particular commodity, but reforming the SOEs would be critical. Reforms and basically SOE reforms would be critical for the country to basically get the maximum output from some of those SOEs and for the people to benefit more than anything else. So on that one, having political stability for the reforms would be critical. So that's another big challenge we see. Do we have the political will to do some of these reforms would be a critical factor to consider. The other one is the revenue. I think I touched on the revenues. Revenue targets are very optimistic. We are looking at 3.2 trillion worth of revenues for this year. That's very optimistic in our view. Again, the primary surplus of 2.3% by 2025, those are the IMF targets given to us. With the current taxpayer base, would be extremely difficult for Sri Lanka to reach. So those are some of the challenges we see in the short term. The banking sector has performed reasonably well now. Banking sector had been going through stress from 2019 from East attacks. From East attacks, there was a moratorium, then there was COVID moratoriums. Sector had performed reasonably well in those couple of years. Of course, now the sector profitability has come down by about 13%, not very healthy. Sector return on equity is about 8.9%, not very good. Having said that, sector capital adequacy, the capital is hovering around 15% as an average. Sector is well liquid because we are not lending a lot these days. Of course, we had other challenges with people migrating, etc. But overall, if you look at the banking sector is absolutely stable. Our liquidity coverage ratios are about close to 200%. So there's enough liquidity, there's enough capital. The systems are absolutely stable to participate in the recovery process. So we are a multinational bank, being here for more than 130 years. We are an emerging market bank, so our roots are in these markets. We have a lot of local, deep local knowledge with the global outlook. Overall, if I look at the last couple of years, we have done very well in terms of supporting essential imports like food, pharma, energy, then supporting the exporters because we need the dollars, supporting the airlines. We are the largest airline bank. We are also the largest financial institutions bank, like bankers for bankers. We work with all the local banks, confirming their LCs, doing their clearing, etc. We got a significant market share in that space. So first thing would be we want to participate better in the financial institution segment, because that segment has not really used the bank lines in the last couple of years because the trade also has come down. We really want to see the trade picking up and participating better in the financial institution segment. Of course, the multinationals were anyway close to us because we had parental support from some of those multinationals, so we done really well with those segments. But we really want to support the typical local industries, where local production for local communities. Of course, we do well on the exports, but we are also looking at some of the domestic manufacturing for the local industry, for the local community. There I think we have a role to play. We also have a small SME book. We will participate in that as well. Also in the retail segment, we will also activate our personal loans and mortgage loans. So all those products are there. It's just a matter of activating. We have enough liquidity, enough capital. The team is in place. So just a matter of activating the system and participating better in the market. So for Sri Lanka, I think tourism will be a very important segment, because I don't think we have tapped the full potential or even one-tenth of the potential. Because Thailand used to get about close to 40 million tourists before the pandemic, when we were getting like 2 million tourists. We only got $4 billion worth of tourism income before the pandemic. So this is easily a $10 billion revenue opportunity. So as a country, we should align to tourism, no doubt about it. But there's a huge opportunity in the sustainable finance space for Sri Lanka. According to our research, we have a $16 billion opportunity in terms of attracting funds and the investors into sustainable finance. So when it comes to sustainable finance, of course, renewable energy is one big component, where there's huge potential in the Mana Basin for wind power. Now we are short of about 500 megawatts, maybe 1000 megawatts, but we can generate about 20,000 megawatts in Mana. That's the kind of potential you have. So if we activate that whole thing, of course we have to then have grid connectivity to India, because we have to export that energy back to India. So some of those new economies are critical for Sri Lanka. We can't bank on the tea and the other traditional exports. Of course, the apparel is doing a significant job in Sri Lanka in terms of exports. Tea is doing a very important role. There are other spices and other commodities. Rubber is a very important segment. But I think we have to think beyond that. It's very important that we think beyond that. Of course, one other thing, Marian, before I forget, I think construction sector has suffered the most. It's like 40-50% down. So reviving construction would be critical. Now to do that, you have to bring the interest rates down. So interest rates come down, then people can borrow, people can construct. I think that's another area to focus on. Some have completely gone out of business, but I think it's time that we participate and get the construction industry up and running and revive that economy. It's a huge economy. One last thing, again, agriculture. I think we sometimes think Sri Lanka is too small to do agriculture. There's this concept that Sri Lanka doesn't have the land mass like India. That is true, but Sri Lanka can do a lot of value-added, high-end agriculture, like the high-end apparel that we do, like the high-end tea that we do. So there are many things that Sri Lanka can do on the high-end side. We don't have the critical mass or the land mass to do anything big, but there are many other, in the fruits and the vegetables, the cinnamon. There are many areas that we can focus on and also activate our entire tea industry. Go into a participation model, partnership model, where activate all our real plantation companies to do more. Is another opportunity that we have. Apart from that, one other thing before I stop, Sri Lanka should look at India as a market. India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India alone is 1.4 billion people. So Sri Lanka, within like 3-4 hours of reach, got a massive market around Sri Lanka. So we should look at being an India +1. How can we be part of a Indian company where you be part of the supply chain, where you manufacture component in Sri Lanka and supply to India, and there are spillovers from India coming out of India to Sri Lanka. So there are many things that you can do. We are already a logistic hub for India. 60-70% of our cargo would go to India in the transshipment side, or more than that actually. So we are very well aligned. It's just a matter of we have to think beyond the 22 million we have as an economy. Tourism, I think we are too many organizations trying to promote tourism and too many bureaucrats trying to get tourism up and running. I think we have to have a central approach to the whole tourism business, in my view. Again, you need catalysts to come in. Like we have a lot of good local hotels. We have hotels like Shangri-La, Hilton. We need names like Four Seasons to come. And at that point, we have to be open-minded. We might have to give land at a very cheap price. So land reforms are critical. So those policies have to change. But tourism, again, we are not doing a good job activating the India corridor. Indians got about 100 million passport holders, 25 million active outbound travelers in India. Now, how many travelers would come to Sri Lanka? Not even a million. So there's a job to do, at least activating the subcontinent, at least look at India as a market. So there's a lot of work on the promotion side, stay, increasing capacity, etc. Governance, of course, governance is a big aspect of tourism. Do you have enough governance in terms of how we charge foreigners, how we manage the guides, all of that? I think a lot of work to be done on that as well. But specifically about large FDIs into energy and ports and other lucrative areas, appetite to all these other minerals. We have investors who are willing to come to Sri Lanka, but Sri Lanka had miserably failed on policy consistency. We come up with a policy, we change the policy. So we also sometimes focus on, we do a lot of work on ease of doing business index. That's not a bad thing. If you can bring it down to something like below 50, it's a really good place to be in. But if you look at near countries like Vietnam, they're in the 70s, but they get a lot of FDIs because they're very well positioned as a market with the supply chain, with the skill set, with the right treaties, with the right market. So you can manufacture in Vietnam and export to US and Europe. So we need to work with the trade treaties. We have to sign up treaties with the right markets. We have to have an open mind about investors coming in. The land reforms have to happen, and the policy consistency should be there. How you achieve that would be through some kind of a constitutional reform where you come up with investor friendly constitutional laws to protect the investors, not only for investors, also for local investors. So investor protection is critical, otherwise we can't get the FDIs in. Loads. I think Sri Lanka still has interestingly, people are looking at Sri Lanka for downstream petroleum, for energy, for tourism, ports and logistics. Those are the areas. There are also other niche areas where people come for manufacturing, etc. Still there are investors coming for apparel, of course, different types of entities, but there is enough appetite for Sri Lanka to attract investments. But we have to be very clear in terms of what we are offering. We can't offer a tax holiday for one entity and not offer a tax holiday for another entity. So we have to have a very clear-cut plan in terms of on certain segments. On this segment, if you come, is it a tax holiday or a tax credit? How many years? All those things have to be very, very clearly documented and be transparent more than anything else. We've always had the strategy. Strategies have been, the execution had been really bad. Transparency and governance, Marianne, I don't have to tell you what we've gone through as a country. We failed miserably in terms of governance. So governance has to improve. Even IMF has come up with a governance diagnostic framework for Sri Lanka. For the first time in Asia, they're doing that. We don't have to wait for IMF to tell us what to do. We should, as a community, we should not always look at government to say, okay, you should fix the problem. We as private sector also have to have governance, very important, because it's a partnership between public, private and all the communities. So I think we have to focus a lot on governance, how we drive things. Once we make a commitment, how do we deliver, how do we monitor, profitability, etc., efficiency. Now, efficiency is another big area. Again, public-private both, in my view. Our efficiency levels have come down, so we have to really focus on that. The one last thing is the labor reforms. So labor reforms also, we've been talking about it. I think there's another plan now We have to really focus on that and get it out. Again, when I say labor reforms, I mean a lot of people talk about hire and fire kind of policy. We also need to look at the employee, well-being and employee benefits and how we protect the employee. It's very important. Unemployment insurance and the employee exploitation of labor, all those things should be looked into. The labor reforms would be critical for Sri Lanka for any investor to come. Well, I think they've done a reasonable job, because the thing is they're grappling with many things, right? Right now the focus is get debt restructuring out of your way. So that's the most important thing. I think on that government has performed really well. Then getting into this whole fiscal consolidation and all that, I think good work has happened. But just by taxing people at 36% and taxing a very small population doesn't really help. So you have to broaden the tax base. You have to add like another million tax files into the system. Now you can only do that by digitizing the whole economy. So we have to do a serious job in terms of digitizing the entire economy, the community, like something very similar to Aadhaar in India. So that piece would be critical. Then the investment framework and documenting the investment framework as a constitutional law would be critical. The governance aspect and the government employee cadre, we got 1.6 million people, I think somewhere there. We need to repurpose and right size. You can repurpose, you can take people from excess areas and redeploy people in other areas where there is revenue. And of course right size the government and pay the government people well. So we should not think like the government, we can attract talent into the government if you pay very low salaries. Now we are paying like 70,000, 150,000. That's the range for a senior government employee, which is not it's not realistic. People are migrating, people are not joining the government as a result of that. So I am of the view that we should pay the government cadre really well, but bring the government cadre to like a million people and run it as an efficient government sector. Those are critical for us to come up the curve. So budget again should go aggressively on the revenue collection. I think they should seriously focus on revenue collection, and there should be serious repercussion if you don't pay taxes. And I don't still see that happening. So very serious revenue collection will be critical, because that's a starting point. Then according to our strategic pillars, we say tourism, ports and logistics, energy, very clear-cut investment framework would be critical to bring the investments in, because we believe there's a potential of $1.5 billion to $2 billion of investments coming our way in the next couple of years if we play our cards right. Then the budget should allocate some money for digitization. I think that's critical. The one that I touched on, the government sector, repurposing and right sizing the government should be a priority. Separately, of course, there can be other areas like how do we revive the economy, bringing the interest rates down, special concessional loans for SMEs, supporting the startups. All those things would be critical for us from a medium-term perspective.